What happens when a single stolen kiss broadcast to the world becomes the detonation point for an entire dynasty? This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's the story of Damien Blackwood, a billionaire titan who had the world at his feet, and the two women who held his fate in their hands. One, the brilliant and fiery business rival he couldn't resist. The other, his pregnant wife, the quiet architect of his success. In the blinding flash of a Gala spotlight, a single moment of passion was meant to seal a historic business deal. Instead, it ignited a war for love, loyalty, and a billion-dollar empire, proving that the most dangerous secrets are the ones hidden in plain sight. The penthouse on Park Avenue was less a home and more a monument to sterile perfection. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of Manhattan, the city lights a sprawling, indifferent galaxy below. For Anna Vance Blackwood, it was the loneliest vista in the world. At 8 months pregnant, she felt more like a delicate, prized possession, placed carefully within the apartment's minimalist decor, than its mistress. Every surface was cool marble or polished chrome. Every piece of art an investment. Every silence heavy with the things her husband, Damien Blackwood, left unsaid. Damien moved through this world like he owned it, because in most respects he did. At 35, he was the charismatic, razor-sharp CEO of Blackwood Industries, the tech behemoth his father Aidan had built from the ground up. But Damien had taken it into the stratosphere. He was a darling of the financial press, a visionary whose name was synonymous with ruthless innovation. And he was, to the outside world, the perfect husband. Tonight was the Starlight Children's Foundation Gala, the crown jewel of the New York philanthropic season. Anna's gown, a bespoke silver silk that cascaded over her swollen belly, lay across the bed. It felt like a costume for a role she was no longer sure how to play. "You're not ready yet." Damien's voice, smooth and impatient, cut through the quiet. He stood in the doorway of their cavernous bedroom, already immaculate in a Tom Ford tuxedo. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jawline sharp, and his eyes, the color of stormy seas, were fixed on the tablet in his hand. "Almost," Anna replied, her voice softer than she intended. She rose slowly, her hand instinctively resting on the curve of her stomach, where their son kicked gently. "He's active tonight." Damien glanced up, his focus momentarily shifting from stock tickers to her. A flicker of something, was it affection or just reflexive duty, crossed his face. "Good. A future CEO needs to have energy." He offered a thin smile and went back to his screen. The comment, meant to be a compliment, landed like a stone in the pit of Anna's stomach. It was always about the future, the legacy, the dynasty. Their son was not yet born, but his role had already been cast, the heir to the Blackwood Empire. Her role, it seemed, was simply to be the vessel. It hadn't always been this way. She remembered the man who had pursued her 5 years ago, the Damien who had seen her Anna Vance, the art history major, with a quiet wit and a family whose old money name lent his new money ambition a veneer of respectability. He had listened to her, laughed at her jokes, and held her as if she were the center of his universe. But with every billion he made, every company he acquired, a piece of that man had been chiseled away, replaced by a cold, calculating strategist. His latest obsession was Phoenix Innovations and its fiery CEO, Isabella Rossi. The name was a constant presence in their home, a ghost at their dinner table. Isabella was everything Anna was not: a self-made titan, fiercely competitive, breathtakingly beautiful in a way that was sharp and dangerous. She was Damien's equal, his rival, and as Anna deeply suspected, his obsession. "The Phoenix deal is closing tonight," Damien announced, snapping his tablet shut. He finally looked at her, really looked at her, but his gaze was distant. "We're announcing the merger at the Gala, a joint keynote. This will be the biggest tech merger in a decade. It solidifies everything." "It solidifies your connection to her." Anna thought the bitterness a coppery taste in her mouth. She had seen the way he looked at Isabella in photos, the way his name was linked with hers in gossip columns they both pretended not to read. "Dynamic duo," one headline had called them. "The king and queen of Silicon Alley." "That's wonderful, Damien," she said, smoothing the silk of her dress. "A legacy for our son." She used the words she knew would resonate with him, the language of his ambition. "Exactly." He strode over, placing a perfunctory kiss on her forehead. His cologne was a familiar, expensive scent that no longer brought her comfort. "Aiden will be there. He'll finally see that my vision for the company surpasses even his own." The mention of his father tightened the knot in Damien's jaw. Aiden Blackwood was a man of old-world principles. He respected strength but despised recklessness. He had founded the company on handshakes and integrity, and he viewed Damien's high-stakes corporate raiding with a kind of weary disapproval. He adored Anna, seeing in her the grace and stability his son seemed to be casting aside. "I called your father earlier," Anna said quietly, "just to check in. He said he was looking forward to seeing us." Damien's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why would you do that? He's your father, Damien, and my father-in-law. I like talking to him." The defensive edge in her own voice surprised her. "He's a sentimentalist, Anna. He doesn't understand the scale of what we're doing tonight, what I'm doing." He adjusted his cufflinks, his reflection staring back at him from the mirrored wardrobe doors, a king surveying his domain. "I need to go ahead to meet with Isabella and the press. My driver will take you. Don't be late. The announcement is at 10. He was gone before she could reply. The silence he left behind was heavier than before. Anna walked to the window, placing a hand on the cool glass. Below the city glittered a universe of infinite possibilities. But from up here in her gilded cage, she felt trapped watching her husband orbit a star that wasn't her. A sudden fierce wave of protectiveness for her unborn child washed over her. It wasn't just for him, she realized. It was for herself. She would not be a footnote in the story of Damien Blackwood. She had Vance blood in her veins, a legacy of her own, and a quiet strength Damien had long forgotten he once admired. As she turned from the window, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Aiden. "Anna, my dear, I have a feeling tonight may be difficult. Know that you are not alone. I will be there for you. Always." A tear traced a path down her cheek. She wiped it away, her resolve hardening like steel. She didn't know what the night held, but Aiden's message was a lifeline. She wasn't just a wife or a mother-to-be. She was a Vance, and she was a Blackwood by marriage. The empire was as much her son's as it was Damien's, and she would not let it or her own heart be shattered without a fight. Isabella Rossi did not enter a room. She conquered it. While Anna was cocooned in her silent penthouse, Isabella was holding court in the presidential suite of the St. Regis, a whirlwind of focused energy. Dressed in a striking crimson gown that hugged her form, she was a living embodiment of her company's name, a creature of full housefort and rebirth. Her team of assistants, lawyers, and publicists fluttered around her, but her attention was fixed on the man in the reflection of the mirror as she fastened a diamond earring. Damien Blackwood. Her history with Damien was a novel written in ashes. They had met at Stanford, two fiercely ambitious scholarship kids with chips on their shoulders, and an insatiable hunger to prove themselves. They had been lovers, intellectual rivals, partners in ambition. Their romance was a conflagration, brilliant and all-consuming, but doomed to burn out. Damien, for all his talk of breaking the mold, was a traditionalist at heart. He saw his future, and he knew it required a certain type of wife. Anna Vance, with her pedigree and placid grace, was the perfect choice for the dynasty he planned to build. Isabella, the daughter of an immigrant mechanic from Queens, was not. His choice had wounded her, but it had also forged her. She had poured every ounce of that pain and fury into her work, founding Phoenix Innovations, with a single burning purpose to build an empire so vast that Damien Blackwood would one day have to acknowledge her not as a spurned lover, but as an equal, or better, yet a superior. And now that day had come. The merger was her masterpiece of strategy. For months, she had played a careful game, a corporate seduction that mirrored their past. She had dangled the prospect of a partnership, a joining of their formidable powers, knowing it was an elixir Damien couldn't resist. He saw the merger as his coronation, the final step in eclipsing his father's legacy. He was blind to the fact that he was merely a pawn in her long game. "The final contracts are ready for your signature, Ms. Rossi," her lead counsel, a sharp man named Julian, said, holding out a leather-bound portfolio. Isabella turned her dark eyes glittering. She took the pen, and her signature flowed across the page, a work of art in itself. "Excellent. Send a copy to Damien's suite. Let him see it's done." "He'll want to sign his at the Gala for the press," Julian noted. "I know," Isabella said with a wolfish smile. "But I want him to know that I've already committed. It makes it more intimate." Every move was calculated. Every word, every glance was a weapon. She knew Damien's weaknesses because they had once been her strengths. She knew his vanity, his desperate need for his father's approval, and the deep-seated insecurity that drove him to conquer everything he saw. She also knew that the embers of their past attraction had never truly died. All she had to do was blow on them. The kiss, she had decided, would be the final perfect flourish. It would happen on stage under the full glare of the lights, just after they announced the birth of their new corporate giant. It would look spontaneous, a moment of overwhelming passion between two visionaries, celebrating their triumph. The press would devour it. It would cement their image as the new power couple of the tech world. But its true purpose was far more sinister. It was a message aimed directly at two people. The first was Aidan Blackwood. She knew the old man despised what he saw as her brash, reckless ambition. The public display of intimacy with his married son would be a deep personal insult, a confirmation of all his fears about Damien's lack of moral fiber. It would drive a wedge between father and son at the most critical moment. The second target, of course, was Anna. Isabella pictured her the serene, pregnant Madonna watching from the audience. The kiss would be a public declaration of her irrelevance. It would humiliate her, shatter her composure, and prove to the world and to Damien who the real queen was. A broken, hysterical wife was of no use to a man like Damien. Isabella was counting on it. "Is everything in place with the offshore accounts?" she asked her financial advisor in a low voice, turning away from the others. "Wire transfers initiated. The shell corporations are clean. Once Blackwood Industries' stock surges tomorrow after the announcement, we begin the sell-off. The leveraged buyout can commence within 48 hours. This was the real merger. Not a partnership, but a hostile takeover disguised as a romance. She would use Damien's own inflated stock price, triggered by the news of their union, to break his company, buy up the fractured pieces, and absorb his Emma into her own. He would be ruined, and she would rise from the ashes of his making, the ultimate revenge. She looked at her reflection once more. The woman staring back was a predator. She had sacrificed everything for this moment. Love, friendship, perhaps even a piece of her soul. But as she thought of Damien choosing Anna, of being dismissed as not good enough for the Blackwood name, a cold fire burned away any trace of regret. "Time to go," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. "Let's go make history." As she swept out of the suite, her crimson gown trailing behind her like a river of blood, she felt a thrill of anticipation. Tonight she wouldn't just be standing in the spotlight with Damien Blackwood. She would be setting his world on fire, and she would be the only one left standing to watch it burn. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a symphony of excess. Crystal chandeliers dripping with light hung like frozen constellations over a sea of New York's elite. The air buzzed with the murmur of 1,000 conversations, the clinking of champagne flutes, and the relentless, strobing flash of cameras. This was Damien Blackwood's natural habitat, a stage where power, wealth, and influence converged. When he arrived with Isabella Rossi on his arm, a palpable shift occurred in the room. They were a supernova, drawing all light and attention to themselves. His classic commanding presence was the perfect foil for her fiery, audacious glamour. Whispers followed them like a wake as they moved through the crowd, Damien greeting senators and banking moguls with an easy charm. Isabella, matching him smile for smile, her wit as sharp as the cut of her gown. Anna arrived 20 minutes later as instructed. The driver had dropped her at the main entrance, and she walked the red carpet alone. The press, having already captured their prize shots of Damien and Isabella, paid her scant attention. A few photographers half-heartedly snapped her picture, their expressions clearly labeling her the wife. She felt a familiar pang of invisibility, but tonight it was laced with a cold, simmering anger. Aidan's text was a talisman in her pocket, a reminder that she was not as alone as she appeared. She found her table, Table 1, the seat of honor, and saw the place cards. Mr. Damien Blackwood, Ms. Isabella Rossi. Her own name was seated further down, next to a junior board member and his starlet girlfriend. It was a subtle yet brutal repositioning of her status. She took her seat, her posture regal, her expression unreadable. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Across the room, she saw her father-in-law, Aidan, standing near the bar. He was speaking with an old family friend, but his eyes met hers over the crowd. He gave her a slow, deliberate nod, a silent promise of support. The gesture fortified her more than any champagne could. At precisely 10 o'clock, the gala's host took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed, "tonight we are honored to witness a historic announcement from two of the technology world's greatest visionaries. Please welcome to the stage the CEO of Blackwood Industries and Mr. Damien Blackwood, and the CEO of Phoenix Innovations, Ms. Isabella Rossi." A torrent of applause erupted as Damien and Isabella ascended the stage, bathed in a brilliant white spotlight. They stood at the podium together, a portrait of unified power. Damien spoke first, his voice resonating with confidence. He spoke of the future of innovation, of synergy. He praised Isabella's genius, her tenacity, her vision. "Together," he declared, "Blackwood Industries and Phoenix Innovations will not just lead the future, we will build it." Then it was Isabella's turn. She was mesmerizing. She spoke of partnership, of shared dreams, of breaking boundaries. She looked directly at Damien, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "Damien Blackwood is a force of nature. He sees not what is, but what could be. and in that vision I found a true partner. Anna watched from her table, her hands clenched in her lap. The performance was flawless, the chemistry undeniable. It was a carefully crafted narrative for public consumption, and the audience was eating it up. She could feel the ripple of excitement, the feverish typing of journalists capturing every word. "And so," Damien concluded, taking Isabella's hand, "it is my profound honor to officially announce the merger of our two great companies. We are now one." The ballroom exploded. The applause was deafening, the camera flashes a blinding, continuous storm. It was the moment of triumph. Damien had craved the pinnacle of his career. On stage, he turned to Isabella, his face alight with a euphoric, adrenaline-fueled glow. The world had shrunk to this single, dazzling point in time. There was only the roar of the crowd, the heat of the lights, and the woman standing beside him. Isabella looked up at him, her eyes shining with what looked like adoration, but was in fact the cold, hard glint of victory. This was it, the moment she had orchestrated. She leaned in, her lips parting slightly, caught in the overwhelming tide of the moment. The applause, the victory, the culmination of a months-long battle. Damien forgot everything else. He forgot his pregnant wife, sitting 100 feet away. He forgot his father's stern warnings about honor and propriety. He saw only Isabella, the woman who had challenged him, matched him, and who now stood beside him as his equal. He lowered his head, and their lips met. It was not a chaste, celebratory peck. It was a deep, passionate kiss, filled with a history of fire and a future of calculated betrayal. The cameras went into a frenzy. The kiss was on the jumbotrons on either side of the stage, a 10-foot-tall monument to his indiscretion. The sound in the room changed. The applause faltered, replaced by a wave of sharp intakes of breath and excited, shocked whispers. This was more than a business announcement. This was a scandal, a soap opera playing out in real time, for a moment that stretched into an eternity. They were the only two people in the world locked in a public embrace that sealed his fate. He was at the absolute zenith of his professional life, and in the very same instant, he had triggered the complete and utter demolition of his personal one. The kiss lingered a fraction of a second too long, broadcast in high definition for the entire world to see. From her seat at table 1, Anna felt the blood drain from her face. It was one thing to suspect, to feel the cold distance and see the lingering glances. It was another to witness it displayed as a public spectacle, a confirmation of her deepest fears and insecurities. The air in her lungs turned to ice. The room, with its glittering lights and hushed whispers, began to swim before her eyes. For a horrifying moment, she thought she might faint. Then she felt a firm, grounding hand on her shoulder. She looked up to see Aidan Blackwood standing beside her, his face a mask of cold fury. His eyes were not on her, but fixed on the stage, on his son. He had seen it all. "It's time, Anna," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that cut through her shock. "Show them your strength." His words were like a splash of icy water. Her grief, her humiliation coalesced into a diamond-hard point of resolve. He was right. She would not be the weeping, forgotten wife. She would not be a victim in their drama. She was Anna Vance Blackwood, and she was the mother of the heir to this empire they were so casually desecrating. With a grace that belied the turmoil in her heart, she pushed her chair back and stood up. Aidan offered his arm, and she took it. Together they turned away from the table and began to walk not towards the nearest exit to flee, but towards the grand arched entrance at the far end of the ballroom. Their movement was slow, deliberate, and it began to draw attention. People turned from the stage, their gazes following the stately progress of the patriarch and the heavily pregnant wife. On stage, Damien and Isabella finally broke their kiss. The roar of the crowd had changed the applause, now mingled with a stunned electric silence. Damien, still high on the moment's triumph, was momentarily confused. He looked out at the sea of faces and saw that they were no longer looking at him. They were looking past him towards the back of the room. He followed their gaze, and his world stopped. Framed in the grand doorway, as if in a perfectly composed portrait of judgment, were two figures. His wife Anna, her silver gown shimmering her pregnancy a stark, undeniable truth, and beside her his father Aidan, his hand resting protectively on her arm, his expression one of glacial, unforgiving wrath. They hadn't stormed in. They had simply appeared. A silent, powerful tableau that instantly upstaged the drama on stage. The 1,000-watt spotlights might have been on Damien, but every ounce of power in the room had just shifted to the entrance. The camera flashes which had been focused on the stage now swiveled in a frantic, clicking wave towards the door. Damien felt a cold dread claw its way up his spine. He saw Anna's face not contorted with tears as he might have expected, but calm, composed, and utterly unreadable. It was a terrifying serenity. It was the face of a woman who had passed beyond pain and had arrived at retribution. But it was his father's eyes that truly gutted him. In them, he saw not just anger, but a profound, bottomless disappointment. It was the look a king gives a prince who has just proven himself unworthy of the crown. In that single glance, Damien understood that he had not just betrayed his wife. He had shattered his father's faith and jeopardized the very legacy he had sought to secure. Isabella, ever the strategist, recovered first. A flicker of annoyance crossed her features. This was not part of her plan, but it was quickly replaced by a mask of cool indifference. She had wanted to destabilize Damien's world, and this dramatic entrance, though not of her making, served her purpose perfectly. The more chaos, the better. A hush fell over the ballroom. The whispers died. The only sound was the frantic clicking of 100 cameras capturing the collision of these two worlds, the triumphant adulterers on the stage, and the silent, judging family at the door. Damien took a half-step forward, his mouth opening as if to speak. But no words came out. What could he say? The evidence of his betrayal was being broadcast on the screens behind him. A grotesque instant replay of the kiss right next to the live feed of his wife's stoic face. Then Aidan and Anna began to walk forward. They moved slowly, parting the sea of stunned socialites, their path aimed directly at the stage. It wasn't an escape. It was a confrontation, and every single person in the room knew they were about to witness the spectacular implosion of the Blackwood dynasty. The walk from the entrance to the foot of the stage was perhaps 200 feet, but for Damien it felt like a mile-long march to his own execution. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, a ringing void filled only by the sound of Aidan's hard-soled shoes on the polished floor, and the soft rustle of Anna's silk gown. Damien's mind raced cycling through a frantic Rolodex of excuses, justifications, and damage control strategies. It was the lights, the moment, a misunderstanding. But as he looked at Anna's face, now only feet away, he knew that no excuse would suffice. Her calm was more damning than any tirade. It was the calm of a final judgment. Aidan and Anna stopped directly in front of the stage, forcing Damien and Isabella to look down at them. Aidan ignored Isabella completely, his gaze fixed on his son with a look of pure steel. "You have disgraced our name," Aidan said. His voice was not loud, but it carried with terrifying clarity in the silent room. "You have disgraced your wife, and you have disgraced the memory of your mother." Each sentence was a physical blow. Damien flinched. The mention of his mother, a woman Aidan had revered, was the deepest cut of all. "Father, listen." Damien began, his voice hoarse. "No!" Aidan cut him off sharply. "You will listen. You will leave this stage. You will get in your car and you will go home. You will wait there for me. Do you understand?" It was not a request. It was an order from the man who was in that moment the true king of the Blackwood Empire. Damien, the titan of industry, the man who commanded boardrooms and moved markets with a single word, found himself utterly powerless. He looked from his father's iron gaze to Anna's quiet strength. He was a boy again, caught and condemned. He gave a jerky, barely perceptible nod. Aidan then turned his attention to Anna, his expression softening instantly. "My dear, let me take you home." He offered his arm again, and Anna took it. She gave Damien one last look, a look devoid of hatred or anger, but filled with a profound and devastating finality. It was a look of pity. Then she turned, and with Aidan as her shield, she walked away. The crowd parted for them once more, a silent, gawking honor guard at a funeral for a marriage. As they exited, the spell was broken. The ballroom erupted into a cacophony of frantic, excited chatter. Cell phones were out. People were tweeting, texting, uploading photos. The scandal was already rocketing across the internet. Damien stood frozen on the stage, the spotlight that had been his moment of glory, now feeling like an interrogation lamp. He turned to Isabella. Her expression was unreadable, a cool mask of composure. "Well," she said, her voice a low murmur, meant only for him. "That was certainly more dramatic than I anticipated." "Isabella." He started looking for an ally, an anchor in the storm. "Don't, Damien," she said, her voice suddenly businesslike, devoid of the warmth she had projected moments before. "This is your mess, a family matter. I think it's best if I distance myself from it." She gave him a brisk, professional nod. "Our teams will be in touch tomorrow to finalize the merger details." She turned and walked off the stage, with a poise that was almost chilling, leaving him utterly alone in the glare of the lights. He was toxic, a liability, and she had severed her connection to him with the surgical precision of a CEO cutting a bad investment. The journey from the plaza back to the Park Avenue penthouse was the longest, most silent trip of Damien's life. He sat in the back of his Maybach, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. He tried calling Anna's phone. It went straight to voicemail. He tried Aidan. The call didn't even go through. He had been blocked. When he arrived, the penthouse was dark and silent. He called out Anna's name, his voice echoing in the marble foyer. There was no answer. He walked through the vast, empty rooms. In their bedroom, he saw that the drawers of her dressing table were open. Her jewelry box was gone. On the bed where her silver gown had lain just hours before was a single sheet of paper. It was a legal document, a petition for divorce citing adultery. It was dated a week ago. The realization hit him like a physical blow knocking the air from his lungs. She had known, or she had suspected enough to have this prepared. She hadn't decided to leave him tonight because of the kiss. The kiss had simply been the signal to execute a plan that was already in motion. The public nature of his transgression was just the final irrefutable piece of evidence she needed. He sank onto the bed, the legal papers trembling in his hand. He had believed he was the master strategist, the one in control of every variable. But he had been a fool. His wife, the quiet, unassuming woman he had relegated to the background of his life, had outmaneuvered him completely. And his father, the man whose approval he so desperately craved, had been her accomplice. The sound of the front door opening made him jump. It was Aidan. He walked into the bedroom, his overcoat still on his face, grim. He didn't look at Damien. He looked around the silent room, at the empty closets and bare surfaces. "She's gone to the Vance estate in Connecticut with her parents," Aidan said, his voice flat. "She's safe. She doesn't want to see you." "I can fix this," Damien pleaded, scrambling to his feet. "Father, I can fix this. I'll apologize. I'll do anything." "Fix this?" Aidan's voice was laced with contempt. He finally turned to face his son. "You broke this, Damien. You broke it with your arrogance and your hubris. You think this is just about a kiss. This is about a pattern of disrespect, of neglect. You put that woman," he spat the word, "and this deal before your family, before the wife who is carrying your son. There is no fixing that." Aidan strode to the window and looked down at the city. "Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., emergency board meeting. Be there. The merger with Phoenix is on hold, pending a full review." Damien stared, aghast. "You can't do that." "The deal is done. It's the biggest moment in the company's history." Aidan turned back, his eyes like chips of ice. "The biggest moment in the company's history was when you publicly humiliated your pregnant wife and brought shame upon our name. The board will be concerned about your judgment, about your fitness to lead." The threat was clear. This wasn't just about his marriage. It was about his crown. His father was not there to console him. He was there to deliver a declaration of war. The Blackwood Industries boardroom on the 80th floor was a place of power, a stark contrast to the opulence of the Gala. It was a cold, minimalist space, dominated by a 30-foot slab of obsidian that served as a table. Through the panoramic windows, a grey, unforgiving dawn broke over Manhattan. The mood inside was just as bleak. Damien arrived at 7:55 a.m., his face pale and drawn, his expensive suit doing little to hide the fact that he hadn't slept. He had spent the night replaying the disaster in his mind, the images of Anna's face and his father's contempt burning behind his eyes. He still clung to the belief that this was a problem he could solve with logic and force of will, the same tools he used to conquer the business world. The board members were already assembled, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and stern disapproval. These were titans of finance and industry, men and women who prized stability and predictability above all else. The front pages of every major newspaper and the lead story on every financial news network that morning featured a picture of the kiss, with accompanying articles questioning the stability of Blackwood Industries' leadership. The company's stock was already plummeting in pre-market trading. Aidan sat at the head of the table, a position he had not occupied in 5 years. As chairman emeritus, his presence was a powerful statement. He commanded the room without saying a word. The seat to his right, usually Damien's, was conspicuously empty. At precisely 8:00 a.m., the door opened again. But it wasn't a lawyer or an assistant who entered. It was Anna. If Damien had expected to see a woman broken by grief, he was mistaken. She was dressed in a tailored navy blue maternity dress that was both professional and elegant. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, immaculate bun. Her expression was calm and resolute. She was not here as a wife seeking pity. She was here as a stakeholder, demanding accountability. 2 formidable-looking lawyers, one of whom Damien recognized as the most feared divorce attorney in New York, followed her in. A stunned silence fell over the room. Board members exchanged uneasy glances. Damien felt a fresh wave of dread. This was an ambush. "Anna!" Damien started rising from his seat. "This is not the place. Please sit down, Damien." Aidan said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Damien sank back into his chair, his authority in this room, his room completely stripped away. Aidan began. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We are here to address a crisis of leadership. Last night, our CEO, my son, demonstrated a catastrophic lapse in judgment, both personal and professional. He has exposed this company to ridicule and instability, and has jeopardized a merger that was predicated on a stable transition." He gestured towards Anna. "Furthermore, he has alienated a key shareholder. I'm not sure if you are all aware, but as part of their prenuptial agreement, and as a gift from me upon the news of my grandson's impending birth, Anna Vance Blackwood is the controlling owner of a 12% stake in this company." Gasps rippled around the table. 12%. It was a massive block of shares, enough to swing any major vote. Damien stared at Anna dumbfounded. He knew she had shares, but he had always considered them a symbolic gesture, a formality. He had never imagined she would wield them as a weapon against him. Anna's lawyer stepped forward, placing a file in front of each board member. "My client, Mrs. Vance Blackwood, has instructed us to file a motion of no confidence in the CEO," the lawyer stated coolly. "His reckless behavior, which is now a matter of public record, proves he is not fit to act as a fiduciary for the shareholders." "This is absurd," Damien exploded, finding his voice. "My personal life has no bearing on my ability to run this company. The Phoenix merger is a brilliant move that will double our value." "Will it?" It was Anna who spoke, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of steel. Every head turned towards her. "Or will it destroy us?" She paused, letting her question hang in the air. "I have never interfered with the business of this company. I trusted my husband's vision, but I am also the daughter of a man who ran one of the oldest investment banks in this city. I was raised to understand that character and business are inextricably linked. A man who cannot honor a vow to his wife and his unborn child cannot be trusted to honor his duty to his shareholders." Her words were precise, devastating. She was not emotional. She was analytical. She was framing his moral failure in the only language these people truly understood, the language of risk. "The merger with Phoenix Innovations," she continued, "was presented to this board as a partnership of equals. But my husband's relationship with Ms. Rossi suggests a profound conflict of interest. Was his judgment clouded? Did he give away too much in negotiations? Was he so eager to seal the deal that he failed to see potential threats?" Damien watched, horrified, as the seeds of doubt she was planting took root in the expressions around the table. He had been played. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a boardroom coup orchestrated by his wife and his father. Aidan spoke again. "I second Anna's motion. We need to put the Phoenix merger on hold and launch an internal investigation into the terms of the deal and the CEO's conduct. In the interim, I propose we install a temporary leadership committee to ensure the stability of the company." The room was a tinderbox. Loyalties were divided. Some members loyal to Damien's aggressive high-profit strategy looked uncomfortable. Others from the more conservative old guard, who had always been closer to Aidan, nodded in agreement. Damien felt the walls closing in. He had walked into his boardroom as a king and was now being tried as a fool. His affair wasn't just a personal failing. It was being expertly reframed as a business liability. He looked at Anna, truly seeing her for the first time in years. The quiet, graceful woman he had married was gone. In her place was a formidable opponent, a woman with Vance's shrewdness and Blackwood resources fighting for her son's legacy. And he had no one to blame but himself. The war had begun, and he had just lost the first most critical battle. The boardroom meeting was a bloodbath, the motion of no confidence passed by a narrow margin, a victory for the Aidan-Anna alliance, secured by a few wavering board members, spooked by the stock's freefall. Damien was stripped of his CEO duties, pending the results of an internal investigation. He was effectively locked out of his own kingdom. He spent the next 48 hours in a self-imposed exile in his silent penthouse, a ghost rattling around his gilded cage. He was inundated with calls from a frantic Isabella, her cool composure finally cracking as the multi-billion-dollar merger she had orchestrated began to crumble. He ignored them all. Her betrayal felt sharper somehow than Anna's. Anna was fighting for family, for legacy. Isabella, he now suspected, had been fighting for something else entirely. The summons came on the third day. A single text from Aidan. My study. Now. The old Blackwood estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, was where Damien had grown up. It was a sprawling stone manor that represented the old-world power and integrity Aidan cherished. Aidan's study was the heart of the home, a room of dark wood, worn leather, and the smell of old books. It was a room where Damien had been both praised and punished as a boy, and he felt a familiar dread as he walked in. Aidan was standing by the fireplace, a tumbler of scotch in his hand. But he was not alone. Anna was seated in one of the large leather armchairs, her hands resting on her stomach. She looked tired, but her eyes were clear and steady. Sit down, Damien, Aidan commanded. Damien remained standing. I want to talk to my wife. Alone. I am not your wife anymore, Damien, Anna said, her voice soft but firm. Not in any way that matters. I am the mother of your son and a shareholder in your company. That is the capacity in which I am here. Aidan placed a thick, bound file on the mahogany desk between them. The investigation I initiated is complete, he said. It was illuminating. Damien scoffed. An investigation into my private life? No, Aidan replied, his voice dangerously calm. An investigation into Isabella Rossi. I started it 6 months ago when I first heard the rumors about you two. I hired the best private intelligence firm in the country. I wanted to know what kind of woman was threatening my family. He slid the file across the desk. You should read it. You were so blinded by your ambition and your lust that you never once stopped to ask who Isabella Rossi really was. With trembling hands, Damien opened the file. The first few pages were what he expected, photos of him and Isabella at discreet dinners leaving the same hotel confirmation of their affair. But then the report deepened. It detailed Isabella's financial history, her network of shell corporations, her ties to ruthless venture capitalists known for hostile takeovers. And then he saw the plan laid out in black and white. Financial analysts hired by the investigators had reverse-engineered her strategy. The merger was a Trojan horse. The terms, which he had seen as generous, were designed to create specific legal and financial loopholes. The plan was to use the post-announcement stock surge, a surge created by his own company's reputation, as liquidity. She would then use a network of offshore funds to short Blackwood stock, initiate a leveraged buyout, using Blackwood's own assets as collateral, and seize control of the company. She wasn't merging with him. She was consuming him. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place with a sickening thud. The kiss. It wasn't a moment of passion. It was a strategic masterstroke. It was designed to create the maximum possible scandal to trigger a crisis of confidence in his leadership and to send the stock price into a volatile spiral she could exploit. It was meant to make him look unstable, reckless and emotional, the perfect target. He had thought he was her partner, when in fact he was her prey. He looked up from the file, his face ashen. He looked at Anna, who was watching him with a sort of clinical pity. "You knew," he whispered. "Aidan showed me the preliminary report 2 weeks ago," she confirmed. "That's when I had the divorce papers drawn up. I knew you wouldn't believe it. You were too enamored with her, with the idea of the two of you as conquerors. The only way to save the company, to save our son's legacy, was to take you out of the equation." The cold, brutal logic of it all crashed down on him. The public confrontation, the emergency board, meeting the motion of no confidence, it had all been a desperate high-stakes gambit to save the company from his own catastrophic blindness. They hadn't just been punishing him for his infidelity. They had been performing emergency surgery on the empire he had nearly given away. He started, his voice cracking. The arrogance, the certainty, the power he had worn like armor had all crumbled, leaving him exposed and hollow. "I'm sorry, Anna. I am so sorry." Anna looked at him, and for the first time a flicker of the old sadness crossed her face. "I know, Damien, but sorry doesn't unbreak a vow. It doesn't erase the humiliation. And it doesn't change the fact that you were willing to risk everything our family has built for a woman who was playing you for a fool." She rose slowly from her chair. "The board is meeting tomorrow. Aidan will nominate me as interim CEO. He will back me. The old guard will back me. I will save this company." Damien stared at her, at the woman he had underestimated in every conceivable way. She was no longer just his wife. She was his successor, born from the ashes of his failure. "What about me?" he asked, the question sounding pathetic even to his own ears. Aidan answered, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You will take a leave of absence. You will check yourself into a wellness retreat. You will disappear from the public eye. And you will fight to one day earn the right to be a father to your son. As for your place in this company..." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "That is a question that may never be answered." Damien Blackwood, the billionaire titan, stood in the center of the room, stripped of his power, his wife, and his pride. He had flown too close to the sun, and the woman he'd thought was the sun had instead been the flame that melted his wings. As Anna and Aidan walked out of the study, leaving him alone with the evidence of his own destruction, he finally understood. The real Blackwood legacy wasn't about mergers or stock prices. It was about character, and he had proven to have none. The empire was safe, but the king was dead. And so the empire was saved not by the king, who nearly lost it, but by the queen he cast aside. Damien Blackwood's story is a powerful reminder that the brightest spotlights can cast the darkest shadows, and true power isn't always found in the boardroom. Sometimes it's in the quiet, unbreakable resolve of a heart that's been wronged. Anna Vance Blackwood didn't just reclaim her dignity. She claimed an empire, proving that the most underestimated person in the room is often the most dangerous. What did you think of this story of betrayal and revenge? Could you see the final twist coming? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this incredible tale of drama and destiny, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who loves a good story, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that are stranger than fiction. Don't miss what's coming next. A chilling, sterile white room, the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor, and Amelia clutching a life she fought to bring into the world alone. Her millionaire husband, Julian, was supposed to be by her side. Instead, he was with her. But when he finally traded his wife for his mistress, the one person he thought would welcome him with open arms slammed the door in his face. What happens when a man who has everything loses it all in a single day? This isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of unexpected alliances and a reckoning no one saw coming. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor hummed a monotonous, soul-crushing tune, a stark contrast to the symphony of chaos erupting in Amelia's world. Lying in the scratchy sheets of the maternity ward bed, she stared at the signed divorce papers Julian's lawyer, a man with a ruthlessly tailored suit and an equally sharp smile, had hand-delivered just an hour after she'd given birth to their daughter Lily. The ink, a bold, unforgiving black, felt like a brand on her soul. Julian Croft. The man whose name was synonymous with tech innovation and old money. The man who had vowed to love her in sickness and in health, had chosen this moment, the most vulnerable, most sacred moment of her life, to sever their ties. He hadn't even bothered to show up. No call, no text, just a legal document delivered with the cold efficiency of a death sentence. Her fingers, still slightly swollen, traced the delicate features of the baby, sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside her. Lily, a name they had chosen together during a happier time. A time when Julian's laughter wasn't a hollow echo in her memory. She had his dark, silken hair and the same determined set to her tiny chin. A painful, beautiful reminder of the man who was now a ghost. The reason for his spectral presence had a name, Isabella Rossi, a name that dripped with the kind of exotic allure Amelia, a girl from a quiet suburban town, felt she could never compete with. Isabella was an art gallery owner, a woman who moved through the world with a confident, predatory grace, her social media a curated gallery of exclusive parties, European vacations, and intimate moments with Amelia's husband. The affair had been a poorly kept secret, a source of hushed gossip in their elite social circle, and a dagger that had been twisting in Amelia's heart for months. She had confronted him, of course. He had fed her the classic, pathetic lines it meant nothing. It was just a fling. They were working through a rough patch. He'd sworn it was over, that Amelia and the baby were his future. She, desperate to believe in the man she loved, had clung to those lies like a life raft. Now the wreckage of their marriage was all around her, and the life raft had dissolved into splinters. A nurse, a kind-faced woman named Clara, bustled in her presence, a small comfort in the sterile room. "How are our two lovely ladies doing?" she asked, her voice soft. Amelia forced a smile that felt more like a grimace. We're okay." Clara's eyes flickered to the legal documents on the bedside table, and then back to Amelia's pale face, a knowing sadness in her gaze. She'd seen this story play out in different forms too many times. "You have a beautiful, healthy daughter, my dear. That's a miracle right there. You focus on that." The advice was sound, but it was like telling a drowning person to appreciate the view. All Amelia could see was the abyss. Her family had disowned her for marrying Julian, whose family saw her as a gold-digging commoner. She had dropped out of her master's program at his insistence, becoming the perfect corporate wife. Her world had been Julian. Now her world was this tiny four-walled room, and a future that was a terrifying, gaping void. Meanwhile, across the city, Julian Croft adjusted his tie in the reflection of his penthouse window, the glittering skyline of the city sprawling beneath him like a conquered kingdom. He felt a pang of something he refused to identify as guilt. He'd instructed his lawyer Marcus to handle the hospital situation. It was cleaner that way, less messy. Amelia was emotional dramatic. The birth would only amplify that. He needed a clean break. He was finally free. The thought should have been exhilarating. For months, the weight of his double life had been suffocating. The lies, the sneaking around, the constant fear of exposure. Now it was done. He had chosen. He had chosen Isabella. He picked up his phone and dialed her number. "It's done," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "The papers are delivered. I'm on my way over." There was a pause on the other end of the line, longer than he expected. "Julian." Isabella's voice was different, not the sultry welcoming purr he was used to. It was cool, distant. "We need to talk." "I know," he said, a touch of impatience in his tone. "We can talk at your place. I'll bring champagne. We're celebrating the first day of our new life." "No, Julian. I don't think you understand," she said, and he could hear the finality in her words, a door slamming shut from miles away. "There is no our new life. You need to listen to me very carefully. Do not come here." Julian's blood ran cold. This wasn't part of the plan. "What are you talking about, Izzy? This is what we wanted. I ended my marriage. For you. You ended your marriage on the day your wife gave birth to your child." She shot back, her voice now sharp as broken glass. "What kind of man does that?" He was stunned into silence. This was the woman who had reveled in their stolen weekends, who had mocked Amelia's provincial sensibilities, who had urged him to leave his boring life behind. "You said you wanted me to be free," he finally managed, his voice rising. "You said you couldn't be with a married man." "And I meant it," Isabella said, "but I thought I was dealing with a man, Julian, not a monster. I may be a lot of things, but I am not the kind of woman who builds her happiness on the wreckage of a new mother and her baby. I thought you would handle this with some semblance of decency, an ounce of class, but this is just cruel. It's disgusting." He could hear the genuine revulsion in her voice, and it terrified him. "Isabella, be reasonable. It's just timing. It had to be done." "No, it didn't have to be done like this," she said. "It shows me who you are. If you can do that to the mother of your newborn child, what would you do to me down the line when you get bored? I'm not interested in finding out. We're done, Julian. I mean it. Lose my number." The line went dead. Julian stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear, the silence screaming at him. He looked out at the city lights, but they no longer looked like a kingdom. They looked cold, indifferent, and impossibly far away. He had torched his own life, expecting to walk into a new, brighter one. But he had miscalculated. He had burned down his bridge to the past, only to find the bridge to the future had just been dynamited. He was standing in the smouldering ruins, utterly and completely alone. The silence in the penthouse was a physical entity. It pressed in on Julian, heavy and suffocating. For the first time in his life, the vast open-plan space, with its floor-to-ceiling windows, felt like a tool. He had orchestrated what he believed to be the masterstroke of his personal life, a seamless transition from a stale marriage to a passionate future. Instead, he had written himself into a tragedy of his own making. Isabella's rejection was a blindside, a twist he hadn't accounted for in any of his calculated scenarios. He paced the length of the marble floor, his mind racing, trying to find a loophole, a way to fix this. He redialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again and again. The same automated voice, a cold digital tombstone on their affair. He sent a flurry of texts, a desperate cascade of, "I love you, we can fix this, and please just talk to me." The single grey tick of non-delivery was his only reply. She had blocked him. Panic, an unfamiliar and unwelcome emotion, began to claw at his throat. He, Julian Croft, a man who bent the world to his will, had been summarily dismissed, discarded. The irony was a bitter pill. He had treated Amelia as disposable, and in turn Isabella had done the same to him. His mind, a weapon of logic and strategy in the boardroom, was failing him now. It kept replaying Isabella's words. "What kind of man does that? I thought I was dealing with a man, not a monster." The judgment in her voice was more damning than any court verdict. She hadn't just left him. She had passed a moral sentence on him. And in the stark, lonely quiet of his self-imposed exile, he was beginning to suspect she was right. A sudden jarring thought pierced through his self-pity. The baby. Lily. His daughter. He hadn't even seen her. In his haste to begin his new life, he had treated her birth as an inconvenience, a final messy loose end to be tidied away by his lawyer. He scrolled through his phone past the blocked contact for Isabella and hesitated over Amelia's number. What would he even say? "Sorry for the divorce papers. How's the baby I haven't bothered to meet?" His pride warred with a nascent, terrifying sense of regret. He was Julian Croft. He didn't beg. He didn't grovel. But the image of that cold, sterile hospital room, a place he should have been, gnawed at him. He had abandoned his wife, yes. But in doing so, he had also abandoned his own child on the day of her birth. The weight of it settled on him, a crushing physical burden. He sank onto a ludicrously expensive Italian leather sofa that suddenly felt as comfortable as a bed of nails. He had blown up his entire life for a woman who now saw him as a monster, and in the process he had become one. Back in the hospital, Amelia was visited by an unlikely ally. The door to her room swished open, and a woman stood there, impeccably dressed in a charcoal grey power suit, her expression unreadable. It was Victoria Croft, Julian's older sister. Amelia's heart sank. She braced herself for an onslaught of accusations for the classic Croft condescension. Victoria had never approved of her making it clear from day one that Amelia was not their kind. "Victoria Amelia," said, her voice barely a whisper, pulling the thin hospital blanket a little higher, as if for protection. Victoria's sharp eyes took in the scene, the sleeping baby, the divorce papers still on the table, Amelia's exhausted pallor. She stepped fully into the room, her heels clicking softly on the linoleum. She didn't look at Amelia. Her gaze was fixed on the bassinet. "So this is her, Victoria," said her voice surprisingly soft. She moved closer, peering down at Lily. A flicker of something unidentifiable crossed her face. "She looks like a Croft. That stubborn chin. Our father had it." Amelia didn't know how to respond. This was not the attack she had anticipated. Victoria finally turned her gaze to Amelia, and for the first time, Amelia didn't see judgment in her sister-in-law's eyes. She saw a weary resignation, and perhaps a hint of shame. "I just came from Julian's." "Victoria," said her tone clipped and businesslike. "He's not well. It seems the Bella Signora Rossi decided my brother's brand of cruelty wasn't to her taste." She kicked him to the curb. Amelia stared at her, stunned. Isabella had left him. The news didn't bring the surge of vindictive pleasure she might have expected. It just added another layer of surrealism to the nightmare. He told me what he did. Victoria continued, her voice laced with disdain. Having Marcus serve you papers. Here. Today. It's a new low even for him. I came here to say, I'm sorry, Amelia. No one deserves that. Our family. We haven't been fair to you. I haven't been fair to you. The apology hung in the air, so unexpected it felt like a foreign language. And Victoria's gaze hardened. I'm here to tell you that we will not be abandoning you or this child. My brother might be a fool and a coward, but that baby is a Croft. My niece. She will have everything she needs. I will personally see to it. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a checkbook. I've already frozen Julian's access to the family trust. His little stunt will cost him dearly. This is for your immediate expenses. Find the best postnatal care, a new place to live, whatever you need. A proper legal team, not the shark Julian hired, will be in touch tomorrow to discuss your settlement. You will not be left with nothing. Amelia was speechless, tears welling in her eyes. It wasn't about the money. It was the validation, the acknowledgement. It was the sight of this formidable woman who had always looked down on her, now standing as her fierce protector. Why, Amelia finally choked out. Victoria looked back at the sleeping baby, her expression softening almost imperceptibly. Because I have spent years watching my brother make selfish, destructive choices. I enabled it. We all did. We let him get away with it because he was the golden boy. But this, she gestured around the room. This ends now. And because that little girl deserves a better family than the one she was born into. And it's my job to make sure she gets it. She looked at Amelia, a steely resolve in her eyes. Get some rest. Heal. Get strong. You're going to need it. We're going to make him regret this. Not out of spite. Out of principle. As Victoria turned and walked out, leaving a stunned Amelia and a check with an astronomical number of zeros on the bedside table. The world outside the hospital room began to shift. The battle lines, once so clearly drawn, were being redrawn in the most unexpected ways. This was no longer just about a failed marriage. It was about to become a war for the soul of the Croft family. And Amelia, the abandoned wife, had just been handed the most powerful weapon of all, the unwavering support of her enemy. The days that followed were a blur of logistics and quiet healing for Amelia. True to her word, Victoria Croft became a force of nature, a whirlwind of controlled, efficient fury. A team of lawyers, a discreet but formidable trio from a top-tier family law firm, replaced the predatory shark Julian had sent. They spoke to Amelia with respect, outlining a strategy that was less about a settlement and more about a strategic dismantling of Julian's assets. Victoria has been clear, said the lead attorney, a sharp-witted woman named Eleanor Vance. This isn't about revenge. It's about ensuring the long-term security of you and Lily, and about holding Julian accountable for his fiduciary and moral failures to his family. A luxury postpartum recovery suite was booked, a place that felt more like a five-star hotel than a medical facility. Nannies were interviewed, a temporary security detail was arranged, and a real estate agent was dispatched to find a suitable, unassailable new home. Amelia, who had felt so utterly adrift, was now surrounded by a fortress of support, all orchestrated by the last person she ever expected to be in her corner, She found herself in the strange position of being the calm center of a storm she hadn't started. While lawyers waged war on her behalf, she focused on Lily. She learned the rhythms of her daughter's needs, the soft gurgles, the tiny grasping fingers, the milky scent of her skin. In the quiet of the night, holding her sleeping child, the pain of Julian's betrayal was still a raw, open wound. But now it was accompanied by a burgeoning sense of strength. She wasn't just a victim, she was a mother, and she had powerful allies. One afternoon, as she was rocking Lily to sleep, her new encrypted phone buzzed, an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Amelia. The voice was tentative female and vaguely familiar. Who is this? It's Isabella Rossi. Amelia's blood ran cold. Her hand tightened on the phone. What do you want? She asked, her voice tight with a mix of anger and dread. I know I am the last person you want to hear from, Isabella, began her voice strained. And I don't expect you to believe me or forgive me. God knows I don't deserve it. But I needed to call. I needed to say, I am so sorry. For everything. Amelia was silent, her mind reeling. I'm not calling to make excuses, Isabella continued, her voice cracking slightly. What I did was wrong. I was selfish, and I was foolish. I let myself believe a fantasy Julian spun, and I ignored the reality of the damage we were causing. When I found out what he did, how he did it, serving you papers in the hospital, it was like a bucket of ice water. It woke me up. I saw the man I had been involved with for who he truly was. And I was disgusted with him, but mostly I was disgusted with myself. She took a shaky breath. I've been doing some thinking about everything, and I've been talking to some people. There are things about Julian, things you should know, things that go beyond what he did to you and me. A chill went down Amelia's spine. What things? His business dealings. The Croft family trust is old and complicated. Victoria controls a large part of it, but Julian has his own ventures. He's been making some very risky, very questionable investments, using leverage in ways that could jeopardize not just his own finances, but the entire family's legacy. I overheard things, saw documents I shouldn't have seen on his laptop. I didn't understand them at the time, but now. She trailed off. He's desperate. That's why he was so eager to lock me down, I think. He thought my family's connections in the art world could be a lifeline for him. He's not just a faithless husband, Amelia. He's a reckless gambler, and he's about to lose the whole house. Amelia didn't know what to say. This revelation was a paradigm shift. Why are you telling me this? Amelia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Because he used both of us, Isabella said, a new hard edge to her voice. He used your love and your stability as a cover, and he used my ambition and connections as his next escapatch. And he was going to discard us both when we were no longer useful. He abandoned you and your child, and I helped him. That's a stain on my soul I'll never be able to wash away. But maybe I can help make sure he doesn't get away with it. Maybe I can give you the ammunition you need to protect yourself and your daughter. There was a long pause. I have copies, Isabella said quietly, of emails, bank transfers, offshore account information. I shouldn't have them, but I do. They're yours if you want them. Julian, meanwhile, was experiencing the slow, agonizing process of his world shrinking. The freeze on the family trust was a crippling blow. His personal accounts, while substantial, were heavily leveraged against assets he could no longer touch. Calls from his brokers became more frequent, their voices tinged with a nervous edge. The market had taken a downturn, and the high-risk tech ventures he had poured millions into were suddenly looking less like genius investments and more like black holes. He was a pariah. Friends who had once clamored for his company now sent his calls to voicemail. The invitations stopped arriving. He was a man tainted by scandal, not the salacious, exciting kind, but the ugly, pathetic kind. He had committed the ultimate sin in their world. He had been publicly and humiliatingly rejected. He tried to see Victoria to reason with her, but she refused his calls and barred him from the family estate. He was an outcast. One evening, fueled by expensive whiskey and a potent cocktail of rage and self-pity, he did the one thing he swore he wouldn't. He drove to the hospital, not the main entrance, but the discreet exit of the luxury postnatal wing he knew Victoria would have booked. He didn't know what he planned to do. See the baby. Confront Amelia. He just knew he couldn't stand the crushing isolation of his penthouse a moment longer. He saw her. Amelia. She was getting into a black town car, a driver holding the door. She looked different, stronger, more composed than he had seen her in years. There was a quiet dignity in her posture that unnerved him. She was holding a baby carrier, and for a fleeting moment he saw a tiny hand wave in the air. His daughter. A primal surge of possession of rage coursed through him. That was his wife, his child, his life, stolen from him. He got out of his car and strode towards them. Amelia. She froze her hand on the car door and turned. Her eyes widened not with fear, but with a cold, hard clarity. The security guard, a large, imposing man, immediately stepped between them. Mr. Croft, the guard said, his voice a low rumble, I'd advise you to stay back. This is my wife and my child. Julian spat, his voice raw. I have a right to see them. You surrendered that right. Amelia's voice cut through the air, clear and steady, devoid of the tremor he expected. You had your lawyer make that very clear. You are not to come near me or my daughter. He looked past the guard directly at her, his face a mask of desperation. Amelia, please. We need to talk. This is all a misunderstanding. Victoria is trying to ruin me. That woman, Isabella, she's a liar. Amelia gave a small, sad shake of her head. No, Julian. For the first time, everything is perfectly clear. I know about the investments. I know about the shell corporations. I know everything. The blood drained from Julian's face. How could she know? You didn't just abandon your family. Amelia said, her voice ringing with the authority of someone who held all the cards. You were prepared to gamble it away. You were never building a future with me or with her. You were just looking for your next bailout. She gave a curt nod to the security guard. We're leaving. As she slipped into the car, she gave him one last look, a look not of a spurned wife, but of a judge delivering a final verdict. It was a look of pity. The car pulled away, leaving Julian standing on the curb, the guard watching him like a hawk. The whiskey buzz had evaporated, replaced by the icy chill of pure terror. She knew, which meant Victoria knew, which meant Eleanor Vance and her team of legal assassins knew. It wasn't just his marriage that was over. It was his entire world. And he had handed his enemies the matches and the gasoline to burn it to the ground. The documents Isabella provided were the key. Laid out on the polished mahogany table of Eleanor Vance's conference room, the printouts of offshore accounts, encrypted emails, and leveraged loan agreements painted a picture not just of marital infidelity, but of massive, potentially criminal financial malfeasance. Victoria Croft sat at the head of the table, her face a grim mask of resolve. Amelia sat to her right, Lily sleeping peacefully in a state-of-the-art stroller nearby. For the first time, Amelia felt like a participant in her own life again, not just a passenger. Isabella, accompanied by her own lawyer, sat opposite them, looking pale but determined. It was the most unlikely war council ever assembled. He used the Croft family name as collateral for these loans, Eleanor explained, tapping a highlighted paragraph. Without the board's approval, he moved funds through a series of shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands, essentially borrowing from himself on paper to inflate the liquidity of his tech startups. It's a house of cards, and from the looks of this market projection, the wind is picking up. He was planning to use a merger with a European art conglomerate to hide the debt, Isabella added quietly. My father has a seat on their board. Julian was very insistent on meeting him. I see now it wasn't about me. It was about access. Victoria's knuckles were white as she gripped her pen. My father built an empire on integrity. My brother has used our name, our legacy, to build a fantasy on a foundation of lies. He has risked everything. Her gaze shifted to Amelia, then to the sleeping baby. Everything he was meant to protect. What does this mean legally? Amelia asked, her voice steady. It means, Eleanor said, a glint in her eye, that we are no longer just negotiating a divorce settlement. We are now in a position to reclaim assets that were fraudulently misappropriated from the family trust. In essence, we can prove that much of what Julian considers his money is in fact stolen property. It gives us leverage to strip him of his board seat, his voting rights, and a significant portion of his personal net worth to cover the debts he has incurred against the family name. It was a total financial annihilation, a complete checkmate. Victoria nodded slowly. Do it. As the meeting concluded and the lawyers began drafting the motions, a strange sense of solidarity hung in the room. Victoria placed a hand on Amelia's shoulder. You are doing the right thing, Amelia, for your daughter. You are protecting her future. Then she turned to Isabella. The air crackled with tension. Miss Rosie Victoria, said her voice formal, but no longer dripping with ice. You did not have to do this. You could have simply walked away. Why, Isabella met her gaze directly. Because your brother reminded me of my own father, she said, her voice low and laced with an old pain. A charming man who builds a world for his family and then becomes reckless with it. My mother paid the price for his mistakes. I helped Julian become the kind of man I've always despised. This is my penance and my warning, for Amelia and for her daughter, so she never has to pay the price for her father's sins. The confession, raw and unexpected, changed the atmosphere in the room. It wasn't about sides anymore. It was about three women all wronged by the same man, now united in a common cause. For Julian, the fallout was swift and brutal. It began with a summons delivered to his penthouse by a stoic process server. It wasn't just a divorce filing. It was a comprehensive lawsuit from the Croft family trust, with his own sister as the lead plaintiff. The allegations were laid out in cold black-and-white detail. Fraud, misappropriation, of funds, breach of fiduciary duty. His bankers who had once courted him now treated him like a contagion. His lines of credit were frozen. Margin calls came one after another, each one a hammer blow to his crumbling financial empire. The tech startup, starved of the fraudulent capital he'd been pumping into them, began to fold. The house of cards was collapsing in on itself, exactly as Eleanor Vance had predicted. He was trapped. Every asset he tried to liquidate was already encumbered by the lawsuit. He was a millionaire on paper, but in reality, he was broke. He had to sell his sports car to cover his initial legal fees. He let his housekeeping staff go. The penthouse, once a symbol of his power, became a dusty, silent prison. The panoramic views of the city were a constant mocking reminder of the world he had lost. Desperate, he tried to rally support from old business partners, but the Croft name, wielded by Victoria, was a weapon he could not defend against. She was systematically dismantling his reputation, cutting him off from every source of power and influence he had ever cultivated. He was left with nothing but his own hubris. He started drinking earlier and earlier in the day, the expensive whiskey his only companion. He would stare at the few photos he had of Amelia from their early happy years. He tried to pinpoint the exact moment it had all gone wrong, the single decision that had led him to this ruin. Was it meeting Isabella? Was it the first lie he told? Or was it something deeper, a flaw in his own character, that had been there all along? One night, in a drunken haze, he found himself scrolling through a gossip blog on his phone. And then he saw it, a picture of Amelia walking in a park. She was pushing a stroller, laughing at something someone off camera had said. She looked radiant, beautiful, and utterly at peace. Beside her, holding a shopping bag and smiling, was Isabella Rossi. And walking on Amelia's other side, pointing at something in the distance for the baby to see, was his sister, Victoria. The caption read, "New Power Trio. Amelia Croft." Victoria Croft and former rival Isabella Rossi form an unlikely alliance, proving that sisterhood is powerful, and hell hath no fury like three women scorned. Julian stared at the image, his world tilting on its axis. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It wasn't just about money. They had formed a new family, a family built from the ashes of the one he had destroyed, and he was not and would never be a part of it. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had not just lost his wife, his mistress, his fortune, and his family. He had lost his place in the world. He had sought ultimate freedom and had found himself in the ultimate prison, a solitary confinement of his own making. The laughter in that photo, the easy camaraderie, the life he could have had. It was a paradise, and he was the angel who had been permanently cast out. He finally understood the true nature of his loss. He had given up everything for nothing, and in doing so, had lost himself. The screen of the tablet cracked under the force of Julian's grip before he hurled it across the room. It shattered against a marble column, the image of the three smiling women, his wife, his sister, his mistress dissolving into a spiderweb of broken glass. The sound echoed in the cavernous, empty penthouse, a fitting soundtrack to the demolition of his life. He sank to the floor, the expensive whiskey doing nothing to numb the new terrifying clarity. The photo hadn't just shown him what he had lost. It had shown him that he had been replaced, utterly and completely. In his self-imposed drama, he had always been the protagonist. Now he saw the truth. He was merely the catalyst, the villain in the origin story of a new, unexpected alliance. They hadn't just moved on. They had evolved, bonding over his destruction and building something stronger in his place. The loneliness was a physical entity, a cold, heavy presence in the room. He had sought freedom and had achieved only isolation. He had chased passion and was left with ashes. For days he barely moved the penthouse, growing darker and dustier around him, a mausoleum for the man he used to be. The legal notices piled up unopened. The finality was too much to bear. One rain-slicked afternoon, driven by a desperation that transcended pride, he took a taxi to the address he'd gleaned for Amelia's new residence. It was a stately, discreet brownstone in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. He stood across the street, drenched and disheveled, a ghost at the gates of a life that was no longer his. He didn't know what he wanted. Forgiveness. A fight to see his daughter. He just knew he couldn't bear the silence any longer. The front door opened, but it wasn't Amelia who emerged. It was Victoria. She held a large black umbrella, her posture as rigid and unyielding as ever. She saw him instantly, her expression not of surprise, but of weary inevitability. She crossed the street, her heels clicking with resolute purpose on the wet pavement, and stopped a few feet from him. "Go home, Julian," she said, her voice flat, devoid of heat. It was worse than anger. It was indifference. "I want to see her," he croaked, his voice raw. "Amelia. And the baby. Her name is Lily." "Victoria," corrected him coldly. "And no, you will not see them. You gave up that right. Remember Victoria, please." He begged the word, tasting like acid in his mouth. He was Julian Croft. He did not beg. But he was no longer that man. "You're my sister. This is my family." A flicker of something pain, regret, disgust crossed her face. "Family. You used our family's name to commit fraud. You brought shame and scandal to a legacy our father spent his life building. You abandoned your wife on the day she gave birth to your child. That is not what family does. You are a liability we have cut loose." She reached into her coat and pulled out an envelope. "The board has reached a final decision. In exchange for you relinquishing all claims, all titles, and your name from any future business, and to avoid criminal prosecution, which I assure you you would not survive the trust, has allocated you a one-time final payment. It's enough for you to disappear and live quietly. But it is not enough for you to ever be Julian Croft again." She pushed the envelope into his hand. "This is the last thing you will ever receive from us. Do not contact me again. Do not try to see Amelia or Lily again. Legal measures have been taken. You are now, for all intents and purposes, a stranger to us." She turned and walked away without a backward glance, leaving him standing in the rain, clutching the envelope that was both his salvation and his life sentence. He had been officially, irrevocably erased. A year later, the Croft Rossi Foundation for Women and Children was celebrating its first anniversary with a gala. The ballroom was filled with the city's most influential figures, but the center of attention was the three women on the stage. Victoria, in her role as chairwoman, spoke of financial literacy and empowerment. Isabella, head of outreach, spoke of creating safe spaces and second chances. And then Amelia, the foundation's president, stepped to the podium. She looked poised, her voice clear and strong as she spoke of resilience, of turning pain into purpose. A year ago, she said, her eyes sweeping across the room. Many of us in this room, myself included, learned that the lives we planned are not always the lives we get. But we also learned that your greatest strength is not found when things are easy. It is forged in the fire. It is discovered when you have no choice but to stand up, not just for yourself, but for those who cannot yet stand for themselves. In the front row, a nanny held a giggling 1-year-old Lily who clapped her hands, her dark hair a familiar echo. Across town, in a small, clean apartment that was utterly anonymous, Julian Croft watched the gala on a local news broadcast. He was sober thinner, haunted by a quiet that had become his constant companion. He saw Amelia on the screen, a woman he barely recognized. The timid, accommodating girl he had married was gone, replaced by this confident, powerful leader. He saw the genuine admiration in the faces of his sister and his former lover as they looked at her. He had orchestrated his own downfall so spectacularly that he had inadvertently created his own replacement, a better version of the world he'd left behind. They were everything he wasn't, united, purposeful, and content. As Amelia finished her speech to a standing ovation, Julian quietly turned off the television, plunging his small apartment into darkness. There was nothing left to watch. His story was over. Hers was just beginning. 5 years passed. 5 years of sense of atonement, of erasure. In a dreary, anonymous city hundreds of miles from the glittering spires of his past, Julian Croft had ceased to exist. In his place was John Anderson, a man who managed shipping logistics with quiet competence, lived in a small, sparsely furnished apartment, and spoke to almost no one. The severance from the Croft Trust, a sum that would seem a fortune to most, but was a pittance to him, was managed with a miser's care. It was his penance, and he lived it every day. He had kept his promise. He had vanished. But while the world had forgotten Julian Croft, the man who was once him could not. The ghost of his daughter was his constant, silent companion. He marked her birthdays on a plain wall calendar, the only decoration in his sterile living space. On those days, he would buy a single pink frosted cupcake from a local bakery place, a candle in it, and watch it burn down the flame reflected in his haunted eyes. He imagined the parties, the gifts, the laughter he would never be a part of. He followed the Croft-Rossi Foundation's progress with the obsessive dedication of a zealot. He learned to navigate the internet through proxies and anonymous accounts, finding obscure local news coverage of their charity, galas, studying photos from the events. He saw his Amelia, transform. The tentative woman he had married was gone, replaced by a leader of formidable grace and confidence. He felt a strange, hollowed-out pride that ached like a phantom limb, mingled with the ever-present burn of regret. He even made small, anonymous donations to the foundation wiring funds through a labyrinth of accounts, a pathetic secret tithe paid to the family he had forsaken. One crisp autumn afternoon, his carefully constructed exile was breached by an accident of fate. A rare, unavoidable business trip brought him back to his former city. He told himself he would stay in his hotel, that he wouldn't tempt the ghosts of his past. But an irresistible force pulled him, and he found himself walking through a park, the very park near the brownstone he knew Amelia called home. He told himself it was a coincidence, a trick of a lonely mind. But then he saw them. Amelia was sitting on a bench, her head tilted back as she laughed, the sound carried towards him on the breeze. It was the same genuine, unburdened laugh he remembered from their earliest days, a sound he thought he had killed forever. Running on the grass, her small form silhouetted against the fiery golds and reds of the autumn leaves, was a little girl with his own dark, silken hair and the same determined set to her tiny chin. Lily, no longer the infant in his memory, but a vibrant, living, breathing person. Julian's breath caught in his throat. He stumbled backward, pressing himself against the rough bark of an ancient oak tree, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was a spectator, at the premiere of a life that should have been his. He watched as Lily, chasing a swirling eddy of leaves, tripped and fell. A small cry of surprise, not pain, escaped her. In an instant, Amelia was there, scooping her up, her movements fluid, with the easy practice of motherhood. She knelt on the grass, whispering comforts, kissing a knee that wasn't really scraped, and within seconds, the little girl's tears turned to giggles. The scene was so simple, so perfect, so devastatingly ordinary. It was every mundane moment of fatherhood he had willingly forfeited. This, he realized with a clarity that was a new circle of hell, was the true fortune he had squandered. Not the money, not the power, but this: the right to kiss a scraped knee. He stayed hidden until they packed up their things and walked away hand in hand, their figures shrinking in the fading light. He was a phantom left alone in the dusk, the image of his daughter's smiling face burned into his soul. The sterile silence of his hotel room was a roaring torment. The encounter had shattered his fragile, monotonous peace. For 5 years he had accepted his punishment, believing his absence was a necessary sacrifice. But seeing her had changed the calculus. He was her father. Did she even know he existed? Or was he just a vague, monstrous shadow in her story? The thought of her growing up hating a man she'd never met, a villain in a story she didn't understand, was a torture beyond anything he had yet endured. He could not storm back into their lives. He had no right. But could he live the rest of his life as nothing more than a ghost? He found a pen and a cheap notepad from the hotel desk and began to write. It was not a demand or a plea, but a confession. The first few pages were stilted, full of false starts. But then something broke within him, and the words began to pour out, a torrent of memory and regret. He wrote for weeks, first in the hotel, then back in his apartment, the pages piling up. He wrote of his own father, a cold, demanding man who equated love with success. He wrote of the crushing weight of the Croft name, of feeling like an imposter in his own life. He did not offer these as excuses, but as a desperate attempt at context. He wrote about Isabella, describing the affair not as a grand passion, but as a cowardly escape from a marriage he didn't have the courage to either fix or end honorably. And then, with searing, self-lacerating detail, he wrote about the day of Lily's birth. He confessed his terror, his moral cowardice, the selfish, catastrophic miscalculation that had cost him everything. He wrote of seeing his daughter in the park 5 years later, of the overwhelming, unconditional love that had ambushed him, a pure, painful emotion, untainted by the pride or possession that had defined his old life. He ended the manuscript, for it had become one with a simple, terrifying proposition. I do not ask for your forgiveness, Amelia. I have no right to it, and I will not force myself into Lily's life. I surrendered that right forever. But I ask you to consider this: one day she will have questions, and I have written the truth for her. It is an ugly, shameful truth, but it is a part of her story. I am sending this to your lawyer, Eleanor Vance. It is for you to keep to burn, to share with Lily when you feel the time is right, or to ignore completely. I will abide by your decision, whatever it may be, without protest. That is my final promise. I simply want her to know, if you ever choose to let her, that her father, for all his monstrous faults, loved her enough to finally tell her the truth. He packaged the thick manuscript and sent it to Eleanor's office. The act felt like leaping from a cliff into a dark, unknown sea. He had relinquished the last vestige of control he possessed, placing his legacy as a father entirely into the hands of the woman he had wronged most of all. A week later, Amelia sat in the quiet of her study, the city a distant, glittering tapestry below. The thick parcel from Eleanor lay on her polished desk. She had stared at it for a full day, before finally slitting it open, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and a curiosity she hated to admit. As she read, her carefully constructed composure began to disintegrate. The Julian in these pages was not the charming man she'd once loved, nor was he the one-dimensional monster who had abandoned her. This was a man stripped bare, his soul laid out in unflinching, excruciating detail. His words were not manipulative. They were a raw, brutal autopsy of his own character. She saw not a villain, but a tragic, deeply flawed human being, a product of a gilded cage she had never fully understood. The fortress she had built around her heart trembled. For 5 years, the story of Lily's father had been a simple, necessary one. He was a man who had made bad choices and had to go away. But this letter, this confession, shattered that simplicity. Lily, asleep in her room down the hall, deserved the truth, didn't she? But was this a truth that would heal her, or a poison that would curdle the perfect, safe world Amelia, Victoria, and Isabella had so painstakingly built for her? She held the letter, the sheer physical weight of it immense. She knew she could not make this decision alone. The next day, she called a meeting, not in a boardroom, but in her sun-drenched living room. Victoria and Isabella sat opposite her, their expressions shifting from curiosity to stunned gravity as Amelia explained the arrival of the manuscript. "He wants nothing." Amelia finished, her voice unsteady. "No contact, no visitation. Just to be known. On my terms." Victoria, ever the pragmatist, spoke first. "Burn it," she said, her voice clipped resolute. "Amelia, we have spent 5 years building a world for Lily that is safe and stable, a world without his chaos. Why would you invite the ghost back into the house? He is a story, a sad one, but one that is finished. Let it stay that way, that way." "But is it finished?" Isabella countered softly, her eyes full of a familiar pain. "My father, he was never capable of this kind of honesty. I spent my life wishing he would just once explain himself, even if the explanation was ugly. A lie, even a kind one, is a cage. This manuscript, it might be a key for Lily, a way for her to understand a part of herself without having to endure the man himself." "You're romanticizing him," Victoria shot back. "This is a man who committed fraud, who abandoned his child. And he admits to it all in his own words," Isabella insisted, leaning forward. "That's the point. He isn't hiding. For the first time, he's not hiding. Don't you see the power in that giving Lily the truth when she is old enough lets her be the judge? It trusts her." Amelia listened, her head spinning. Victoria was offering protection. Isabella was offering truth. Both were born of love for Lily. She looked from one to the other, the two women who had become her rocks, her sisters. They had helped her slay the dragon, but now his voice was echoing from the past, and they were divided on how to answer. Her story, she had thought, was over. His was over. But she realized with a dawning, terrifying clarity that as long as they had a child, their stories would forever be intertwined. And Julian Croft, the ghost she had banished, was asking for one last thing. The choice to shield her daughter within the perfect safety of their world, or to arm her with a complex and painful truth, was hers alone. and as she looked towards the hallway where her daughter slept, she had no idea what to do. In the end, Julian Croft, the man who thought he could discard people like last season's assets, was left with only the echoes of his own bad decisions. He lost more than a fortune. He lost the future. This story serves as a powerful, raw reminder that integrity is the one currency you can't afford to go bankrupt on. The bonds between Amelia Victoria and even Isabella, forged in the fires of betrayal, created a new kind of family, one built on strength, resilience, and mutual respect. They didn't just survive, they thrived. If their incredible story of justice and unexpected alliances moved you, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with someone who needs to see that even from the deepest betrayals, strength can emerge. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next real-life drama.